He was an ordinary teenager who met an unfortunate end after being hit by a truck. He was then reincarnated into a world brimming with magic. In this new life, he was gifted with water magic and wished for nothing more than to live a peaceful, quiet life alone. However, without even realizing it, he gradually became the most powerful mage in the world. At the age of 15, Ryou found himself in a strange white void. As he stood there in confusion, a tall blonde man appeared and informed him that he had died. When Ryou recalled being run over by Truck Kun, he asked if the man was God. The man replied that he was more like an angel, tasked with sending Ryou into another world. The angel explained that Ryou could live however he wanted in the next world. Ryou, being a laid-back person, requested a slow, peaceful life. The angel had no objection and revealed that about 20% of the people in that world could use magic, and Ryou had an affinity for water magic. Because of his choice to live peacefully, the angel arranged to place him in a safe house in the forest, surrounded by a monster-proof barrier and stocked with 2 months' worth of food. Ryou wakes up in the house in the middle of the forest and immediately heads outside to test out his newfound magic abilities. He then checks out his house that has some frozen meat in a cold room and also an empty bath. There is a knife and 2 beginner-level books on the table that tell him about monsters and plants in the area. After that, he heads outside again and experiments with magic, discovering that he can create water just by imagining it. No need to chant any spells. He wants to take a hot bath, but can only create room temperature water, so he decides to start a fire instead. He goes full caveman mode and tries creating fire by rubbing sticks together, but he does not have the required skill or strength for that. He gives up, but then he gets an idea to use the sunlight to create fire instead. He decides to create a lens using ice, imaging individual water molecules bonding together as heat is stolen from them, and ultimately succeeds in freezing the water. He then carves the ice into a sphere and uses it as a lens to start a fire. Thanks to that, he can enjoy a hot bath at night and realizes that he can create hot water directly if he just applies the principles of modern science to magic. The next day, as he has some dried meat for breakfast, Ryou thinks that he must increase his offensive power because he will need to hunt monsters once he runs out of stored food. He starts by practicing to shoot a water ball at a tree. Even though he hits his target on the first attempt, it doesn't do any damage. He is not discouraged by that and decides to shoot out a high-pressure water jet, believing it will have enough power. However, he can't put enough force into the water jet to reach the tree. Ryou feels like giving up. Then he recalls that the angel told him the key to using magic is his imagination, and he can get better only with regular practice. So Ryou keeps practicing shooting water jets until he can consistently hit the tree. At night, he is able to generate hot water directly. The next day, he tries creating ice crystals out of thin air because he has always dreamed of using the Icicle Lance magic spell. However, shooting an icicle is even harder than shooting water. But Ryou keeps practicing it along with his other water magic variations. Days pass, and he becomes more skilled at using water and ice. One day, he decides to head into the forest to hunt for some food. He explores the beautiful forest and decides to gather some herbs and call it a day. But just then, he notices an angry boar staring at him. Ryou freezes in terror as the boar charges at him, and he barely gets out of its way at the last moment. The boar simply knocks down a tree, and Ryou gathers the courage to fight back. He covers the ground in front of the boar with a sheet of ice, making it slip. As the boar slides towards him really fast, Ryou creates multiple sharp icicles pointing towards it at the end of the runway. The boar hits the icicles at full speed and immediately dies after being turned into Swiss cheese. Ryou can't believe that he won. And at night, he checks his book on monsters to find that boars are the weakest kind of monsters. He then notices that even though the book talks about beginner-level monsters, there are 2 special entries at the end. First one is about dragons, who are powerful enough to burn down entire cities easily, and if one spots them, he should immediately run away. The second page is about demons, beings of unknown origin, and the book just tells everyone to pray that they never run into a demon, because that means instant game over. Ryou realizes that the world is too big, and he needs to get stronger fast. So the next day, he ditches his clothes to go full Tarzan mode and ventures into the forest again. This time, an assassin hawk attacks him, and he barely dodges its first attack. The huge bird then sends invisible wind slashes towards him. Ryu realizes that this monster is way out of his league. He runs away, creating ice blocks behind his back to block the wind slashes, and then shoots water jets at the bird. The assassin hawk dodges everything and then charges towards Ryu at full speed, but he creates an ice wall at the last moment, blocking its attack. The bird loses one of its eyes because of the collision, and it decides to retreat this time, much to Ryu's relief. However, while he was running away from the hawk, Ryu lost his sense of direction. As he tries reaching his house, he suddenly finds a glowing lake with a headless knight standing on the water's surface along with a headless horse. Ryu is stunned to see this, and then the headless knight turns its attention towards him. Luckily, he returns home in one piece and continues exploring the forest after that, fighting stronger monsters and mastering his attack magic. At night, he goes to the lake again, where the headless knight is waiting for him. Ryu could not find anything about headless riders or Dullahans in the book, and he wonders if it is because they are high-level monsters, or if they are not considered monsters at all. However, none of that matters because he is here to spar against it. Ryu attacks the headless knight with a sword made of ice, but he can't manage to land a single strike. He keeps taking hits instead, but blocks them all with an ice shield. He eventually gets exhausted and falls on the ground, but the headless knight doesn't attack him because it is actually training him. As he gets up, the headless knight comes towards him, holding a small crystal knife. The knight coats the knife in water and then freezes it, turning it into a sword of ice. It gives the sword to Ryu, who realizes that the headless knight is asking him to master this technique. Soon after that, Ryu runs into the assassin hawk he fought earlier, but this time it has evolved into a stronger version of itself, but also lost all its rights. The evolved hawk sends wind slashes at Ryu, who creates ice walls to block them instantly. He barely manages to avoid getting hit by the attacks that tear through his shields, because they are much stronger than the last time. Ryu is forced to run away, and he can only block the hawk's attacks. The hawk suddenly speeds towards him, and Ryu somehow stops its attack by piling multiple ice shields in front of him. He tries to hit the hawk with icicles, but that doesn't work out either, and then the hawk uses a sonic attack to immediately cancel his ice shields. Ryu realizes that he is in trouble now, but then the hawk shocks him both figuratively and literally by attacking him with a thunderbolt. The monster swoops towards him to finish things, but Ryu manages to pull out his crystal sword and parry its attack. He can even slash away the invisible wind attack sent by the bird, and when it swoops towards him again, he manages to stab it through the chest. The hawk falls to the ground and Ryu walks towards it, realizing that he just met the monster twice, but they developed a really strong bond. He thanks the hawk for motivating him to grow stronger, and then pulls out the sword to let it bleed to death peacefully. Ryu then begins to head home, but then to his surprise, a dragon comes there. He figures that it is going to be his last day in this world, but surprisingly, the dragon starts talking to him through telepathy. The dragon asks him if he saw a black hawk, and Ryu panics, thinking that he might have killed the dragon's minion. Luckily, the dragon seems pretty chill about it, and even compliments Ryu on his achievement. He then points out that the weapon he is carrying is quite rare, because it is the sword of the Fairy King. Ryu can't believe that, and he decides to learn more about the world from the friendly dragon who introduces himself as Lewin. They talk all day, but in the evening, the dragon gets called home, and he tells Ryu that they might meet again someday. On the other hand, the angel suddenly finds that he missed some details in Ryu's status. Turns out Ryu is the second person in 10,000 years of the angel's career to have a hidden trait, and his hidden trait is called eternal youth. A few weeks later, Ryu starts craving seafood, so he visits the beach. To his shock, he finds a shipwreck there. He quickly spots a man near the ship, and upon checking closely, Ryu realizes the man is no longer alive. Suddenly, he hears a groan, and his eyes light up. It's the first living person he has met since arriving in this world. The man, named Abel, has flashbacks of a giant octopus monster attacking his ship during a storm, which caused him to fall into the ocean. But when he opens his eyes, he finds himself inside Ryu's house. He realizes he somehow made it out alive, and immediately begins searching for others. As he leaves the house, he grows more confused because he has no idea where this place is. Then Ryu approaches him from behind. Abel is shocked because despite being a fairly skilled warrior, he didn't sense Ryou coming. He is also surprised by Ryou's unusual clothing, but chooses to be polite and not comment on it at first. Abel introduces himself and thanks Ryou for saving his life. Ryou replies that he could only save him. Everyone else was already dead when he found them. Abel tells him not to worry about those guys. They were smugglers. But before he can say more, his stomach growls loudly. Ryou suggests they talk over a meal and leads him inside. Abel quickly brings up the topic of Ryou's clothes. Ryou explains he has no other clothes and no fabric to make new ones. Abel tells him to just buy some. He immediately stops, thinking Ryou must be too poor to afford clothes. But Ryou eases his guilt by explaining there's no one else living in the area besides him. Abel asks if Ryou hunts for food, and he confirms. Next, he asks if Ryou uses the knife for hunting, but Ryou shows off his water magic, saying he mostly hunts using magic. Abel is impressed because only half the people in the world can use magic, and he's in the other half that can't. This surprises Ryou because the angel told him only 20% of people can use magic. Anyway, Abel asks Ryou to take him to the shore because he needs to confirm something. On the way, Abel tells Ryou to let him take the front lines if they encounter any danger. Ryou says it's not necessary, but Abel insists because he doesn't want to be saved all the time. Ryou lets him do as he pleases, and they soon reach the broken ship, where all the bodies have vanished. Abel thinks either the monsters or the sea took them, and thanks Ryou for rescuing him, saying otherwise he would have faced the same fate. Abel says he couldn't find what he was looking for and for now wants to meet up with his friends. But the storm pushed the ship far south and he has no idea which way to go. Suddenly, he gets an idea and asks Ryou if he would like to come with him. Ryou is shocked, but Abel explains he could use his help to find his way back, and then he could get Ryou a job with better living conditions. Ryou thinks about the offer for a while and finally decides to become Abel's guide back to the city. That evening, he looks at his garden, which he has cultivated with great effort, feeling a bit sad about leaving it all behind. At night, he tells Abel he's going out to say goodbye to someone. Though curious, Abel doesn't pry. Meanwhile, Ryou heads to the lake to see the headless knight and inform him that he will be leaving the forest for a long time. He thanks the knight for teaching him how to fight and then takes out his knife, saying he'll fight extra hard tonight. The headless knight draws his sword, and Ryou charges, pushing him back with relentless strikes. After a long and tough fight, Ryou grows exhausted, and the knight returns to the lake. Ryou thanks him once more, but the knight remains silent. However, as soon as he reaches the water, the knight turns and summons a magical suit from beneath the surface as a farewell gift. Ryou is touched by the gift and thanks the headless knight again before heading home. The next morning, Ryou and Abel prepare to depart, and Ryou feels nostalgic about leaving the place he has spent so much time in. Soon, they encounter a wild boar in the forest. Abel asks to handle it. He dashes toward the boar with his sword drawn and uses a combat skill to turn the poor animal into a donut. Ryou is amazed and asks what combat skills are. Abel explains that people who fight with weapons use combat skills. They camp in a hollow tree that night, and the next day resume their journey. They come across some lizard men in a swamp, and Abel decides to change their route to avoid them because they're quite strong. However, Ryou senses the lizard men are still following them, and Abel prepares for battle. Ryou warns that there are too many, so he will use magic to help fight. Abel doubts Ryou can fight without his staff, but is shocked when Ryou blasts 4 lizard men with his icicle lances. After the fight, Abel asks about the spell. Ryou says it's just the regular icicle lance, but Abel notes that his wind mage friends can only cast 1 attack at a time.
While Ryou is summoned 4 at once, Ryou guesses it's a difference in wind versus water. Magic, Abel decides not to overthink it and suggests continuing their journey. Before leaving, Ryou creates 2 glasses from ice and fills them with water. Abel notices Ryou uses a different incantation this time, but Ryou covers it up, saying he must have misheard before. Abel then gives Ryou a coin and excitedly says it's the first time he's seen money. Abel is surprised because he thought Ryou was poor, but never imagined he was this poor. He tells Ryou there are 3 major countries in the Central Plains: the Kingdom of Knightly, the Debussy Empire, and the Handaloo Federation. Ryou mocks the name Debussy Empire, and while he keeps ranting, they reach a vast clearing dart suddenly. A rock near them moves on its own, and Abel quickly slashes it in half. Ryou raises a water shield to block stones flying toward them, realizes they've walked into a nest of rock golems. Ryou asks if golems aren't usually more humanoid, but Abel decides to fight before answering. He dashes toward the nearest golem, blasting a hole through it. But the golem quickly repairs itself and attacks Abel. Abel retreats, saying their attacks won't be effective, but Ryou gets an idea. He creates a huge ice cube in the air and drops it on the golems, crushing them. Abel is stunned, having never seen such a spell before. Ryou uses the ice cube a few more times to defeat the rest. They find a special rock golem with a big magic stone, and Abel says it will sell for a lot. Ryou says he'd like to get magic stones from other golems too, but they're buried under ice, and he's either too lazy or too dumb to melt at all. They continue their journey and soon come across a gigantic croc-hippo hybrid. Abel says it's a behemoth, a very rare and powerful monster he's never seen before. Ryou asks if they should hunt it, but Abel says it's impossible. Just then wyverns arrive, and Ryou gets excited to see a monster battle. The wyverns shoot rocks with magic at the behemoth, but it roars, canceling the magic and causing the wyverns to fall. Ryou tells Abel the behemoth probably used a magic cancellation skill. Later, during dinner, Abel asks Ryou more about this skill, having only heard about dungeon traps that can do it. Ryou gets excited hearing about dungeons, and Abel mentions one in the city of Loon where they are headed. Ryou gets mad that Abel didn't tell him earlier and asks if he's hiding anything else. Abel asks if Ryou knows about dwarves and elves, but Ryou asks him to explain. A few days later, they reach a mountain range, and Ryou says they'll find human settlements after crossing it. Abel asks how he's so sure. Ryou wonders if he should tell him about meeting a dragon who told him a lot, but decides to keep it secret, saying it's knowledge beyond human comprehension. Soon they hear a strange sound and prepare to fight. A powerful monster called a griffin approaches from the sky, and both panic. Abel has a panic attack, but Ryou calms the situation by throwing a chunk of meat into the air. Abel copies the act, and the griffin grabs both pieces before flying away. They sigh in relief and agree they wouldn't have lasted long if they'd fought something so strong as they continue. Abel says no human has encountered behemoths or griffins in the past 100 years, and the tall mountains must be blocking their path to settlements. That reminds Ryou that the wyverns who fought the behemoth came from the north, meaning their nest is nearby. He turns out to be right. They soon find wyverns feeding on a monster Ryou wants to fight, but Abel says it takes at least 20 experienced adventurers to face. Ryou says they won't be able to avoid fighting forever and asks if it would be better to pin the wyverns to the ground. Abel agrees, saying he can beat one in close combat. Ryou steps forward, chanting a long fake spell to summon for icicles. To stab the wyvern's wings, Abel uses this chance to kill them, but then two more wyverns arrive. Ryou pins them down with icicles, this time without chanting a spell, and Abel gets suspicious. Anyway, they defeat the wyverns, collect the magic stones, and continue north. Soon they cross the mountain range and arrived at the Green Hills. Abel expressed surprise that they had not only fought wyverns, but also managed to collect a significant number of magic stones. He said the stones would fetch a good price once they reached the Empire. Ryou suddenly grew curious about which country they were heading to. He mentioned that he was fine with any destination except the Debuhe Empire. Abel reassured him that the Debuhe Empire was farther north. Ryou appeared relieved upon hearing that. This confused Abel, prompting him to ask Ryou if he had any issues with the Empire. Ryou clarified that he had no issues with the Empire or its people. He just found the name unbearably cringe and didn't want to be associated with it. Abel found this response quite odd. Suddenly, Ryou spotted a road in the distance. Seeing that it ran east to west, Abel realized that the mountain range they had crossed wasn't ordinary. When Ryou asked what he was thinking about, Abel brushed it off, saying it was nothing. He noted that the road would lead them to a town. Ryou became excited at the thought of sleeping in a bed. Abel recommended that he try out the food in the town. They reached the town by nightfall. While eating dinner at an inn, Abel suggested that Ryou register with the Adventurers Guild. He explained that a guild license would serve as his identity card. He added that with a guild license, Ryou wouldn't have to pay taxes when entering a new city. Abel reminded him that he had just paid a silver coin to cover Ryou's entry fee for the town. Ryou began taunting him, asking if he was really going to keep track of every penny he spent for a friend. Abel was mildly cringed out by this behavior but continued his lecture. He explained that being a member of the Adventurers Guild meant that the guild would buy magic stones and monster materials. He noted that only alchemists could use those materials properly, sparking Ryou's curiosity. Before Ryou could ask further questions, a waitress brought his food. He was stunned to see a plate of curry rice. Ryou tried to process how curry rice could exist in this world. He recalled that even in the Ice Guy anime, the protagonist had to travel the world to create perfect curry. He had kind of been looking forward to doing that himself. The taste of the curry was just as delicious and nostalgic as the one he used to eat in Japan. Ryou quickly finished the plate and ordered more. The next day, Ryou kept rambling about how good the curry was. He said it was yet another interesting thing that Abel had hidden from him. He playfully urged Abel to reveal all the secrets he was hiding. Abel was momentarily taken aback, but Ryou simply wanted to know about dessert shops in the town. Abel nervously walked away, saying that he didn't like sweets. Ryou found his behavior suspicious and was left confused. They resumed their journey and soon reached the town of Loon, surrounded by vast wheat fields. As they approached the town gate, the guard Nimmer recognized Abel. He was shocked to see him, since he had been reported missing months earlier. Abel explained that a lot had happened, but he had managed to return home thanks to Ryou. Nimmer thanked Ryou for saving his friend and eagerly shook his hand before catching up with Abel. Once inside the town, Abel told Ryou that they should head straight to the guild. With Abel there, Ryou could rank up immediately at registration. Abel explained that usually, newbie adventurers were assigned F rank. However, if a B rank or higher adventurer put in a good word, they could be registered as D rank right away. They reached the guild, where everyone was pleasantly surprised to see Abel again. People surrounded him like he was a celebrity. Ryou was glad to see that Abel had so many people who cared about him. He decided to let Abel enjoy his reunion a bit longer and stepped outside to get some fresh air. While walking, Ryou suddenly ran into an elf. He was captivated by her pointy ears and pretty face. The elf girl couldn't take her eyes off him either, noticing his outfit. She recognized that he was wearing the Fairy King's coat. She commented that the Fairy King must really like him to give such a gift. Ryou could not understand what she meant. The elf girl said she was in a hurry but hoped to meet him again someday. Ryou stood there baffled. Just then, Abel came outside to get him and told him to come back in. He introduced Ryou to everyone as the person who had saved his life. Everyone thanked Ryou, and he started enjoying the attention he was receiving. Abel then took him to the front desk and asked the receptionist to register Ryou as a D-rank adventurer on his recommendation. The receptionist was shocked. No one from Abel's party had ever recommended anyone before. Abel replied that Ryou was a very special case. The receptionist said that Ryou would still need to show proof of his strength for a rank up. Abel said he wanted to talk directly to the guildmaster about that. The receptionist told them to wait. Soon, the dramatic guildmaster Hugh came running when he heard that Abel had returned. Abel introduced Ryou and said that he wanted him to take the rank-up exam. Hugh replied that Ryou's strength would need to be tested. Abel insisted that Ryou was stronger than him, which the guildmaster found hard to believe. To prove his point, Abel showed Hugh the magic stones they had collected from the wyverns. Hugh lost his mind. He said the amount of magic stones meant they had hunted enough wyverns to destroy an entire country. Abel assured him that there was no need to worry about a monster attack. They had hunted the wyverns south of the Malefic Mountains. Ryou asked if the name of the mountain range was significant. Hugh said that he had never heard of anyone crossing the Malefic Mountains safely. He explained that the mountains were so dangerous that even the highest-ranking adventurers didn't go there. He was stunned that Ryou and Abel were the first people in history to accomplish this feat. He immediately agreed to raise Ryou's rank without a test. Just then, Abel's party burst into the room, visibly emotional. They had thought they would never see him again. The guildmaster let them catch up while he took Ryou outside for registration. Ryou followed, and Abel asked him to wait at the receptionist's desk afterward. He said he wanted to show him a special place. Ryou led Ryou to his office. He explained that Abel's party, the Crimson Sword, was one of the strongest and most popular parties in the guild. Ryou was not surprised. Instead, he wondered if he truly deserved to be a D rank from the start. Hugh said he knew how talented Abel was, but even Abel couldn't defeat a wyvern alone. That made him believe Ryou had played a key role in fighting them, which justified the D rank. Just then, the receptionist came into the office with the equipment needed to register Ryou. Hugh left her to it, saying he had too much paperwork. The receptionist Nina introduced herself and began asking Ryou the standard interview questions. She explained that for the first 300 days after registration, Ryou could stay at the guild lodgings, but afterward, he would need to find other accommodation. She also told him about a course on dungeon exploration offered to new adventurers. Ryou immediately expressed his interest in enrolling. Nina instructed him to come to the meeting hall 2 days later at 9 o'clock in the morning. Ryou was shocked to learn that they even had clocks in this world. Nina then moved on to the actual registration. She asked Ryou to place his hand on a crystal device in front of him. As he did, the crystal scanned his biometrics and uploaded the data onto a metal plate above it. It turned it into his guild card. Nina congratulated Ryou on officially becoming a registered adventurer, and they left the office. Soon after, Abel took Ryou on a tour of the town. He said he wanted to buy Ryou some clothes and a staff as payment for escorting him there. Ryou was glad to receive the clothes but asked about the staff. Abel explained that all magicians needed a staff. Ryou replied that he could use magic just fine without any tools. He added that he also used a sword in melee fights, so a staff wouldn't be helpful to him. Abel was surprised, especially when Ryou revealed that the small knife he carried was actually his sword. Ryou then said he needed something more urgently than clothes or a staff. He needed information about the basics of this world. He soon learned that the hour, day, week, and month in this world matched those of Earth. They even used the metric system. This confirmed to him that someone from Earth must have come to this world long ago. Abel returned from the store after paying for the items Ryou had chosen. He then told Ryou that the main event of the day was still to come. He took Ryou to a large inn where all his friends from the guild had gathered to celebrate his safe return. They partied all night. The next morning, Nina had to bail Ryou out to show him where he would be staying. She took him to a room where 2 newbie adventurers were already staying. The brown-haired one introduced himself as Nils, and the blonde one as I Do. They welcomed Ryou to the room. After Nina left, Nils began talking about how much he liked her. I Do told him to stop dreaming about women outside his league. He then made small talk with Ryou about life at the guild lodgings. Suddenly, Nina returned with another newly registered adventurer who nervously introduced himself as Amon. The 4 boys quickly began to bond. But a few days later, Ryou and Amon completed their crash course on dungeon exploration for beginners. Their instructor informed them that they would be entering the first level of a dungeon that afternoon. Amon appeared visibly tense about the upcoming dungeon trip. Ryou advised him to relax, warning that getting worked up now would only tire him out before they even reached the dungeon. The instructor then asked if anyone had questions. Ryou raised his hand and inquired if there was a way to instantly travel to floors they had previously cleared. The instructor was impressed, noting that such a question typically came from experienced adventurers. He explained that some dungeons in the south offered instant travel between checkpoints, but unfortunately, Loon's dungeon lacked that feature. Afterward, the instructor led all the students to the dungeon located at the heart of the city. He explained that the city had been built around the dungeon itself, and every few years the monster population inside would spike, sometimes causing monsters to reach the surface. He assured the newcomers that the dungeon's surrounding walls protected civilians and that a major monster wave wasn't expected anytime soon. They soon reached the first floor of the dungeon, a designated safe zone without monsters. The instructor announced that they were free to explore this level but should stay close to the entrance. Ryou and Ammon teamed up. Not long after, Ryou sensed a monster approaching. He told Ammon to prepare for a strike while he held the creature in place. Nervously, Ammon drew his sword. Moments later, a monster ant appeared, and Ryou immediately identified it as a soldier ant. Recalling the details from a book he had read, he instructed Ammon to strike the monster's neck while he immobilized it using icicle lances. Ryou pinned the monster to the ground, and Ammon successfully cut off its neck, securing his first kill. Ammon was ecstatic about the achievement, and Ryou retrieved the ant's magic stone as a trophy for their first successful hunt. That evening, they had dinner with their roommates who wanted to celebrate their first dungeon trip. The group was impressed that they had managed to defeat a soldier ant. Ammon humbly stated that he had only delivered the finishing blow, giving credit to Ryou for holding the monster down. He expressed his desire to explore the dungeon again the next day, although he admitted feeling uneasy about going alone. Ryou offered to accompany him, explaining that he too wanted to investigate further, especially since they had encountered a monster on the first floor despite the instructor's assurance that it was monster-free. Ito chimed in, mentioning that he had also heard about soldier ants appearing on the first and second floors lately. The boys were puzzled by this development. Just then, Abel arrived and explained that soldier ants could dig their way up, which startled the group. They were in awe at seeing the town's most famous adventurer up close. As usual, Ryou was casual in his conversation with Abel. Abel, in turn, asked the others to look after Ryou, commenting that he lacked common sense. Suddenly, Mills stood up straight and introduced himself to Abel, declaring that he was his idol, and that he aspired to become a famous adventurer like him. Mills asked to shake Abel's hand, and Abel obliged, advising him to work hard but always prioritize survival. Ryou then asked Abel why he was out so late. Abel replied that he had just returned from his latest mission. At that moment, Abel's party arrived, and the girls were visibly upset that he had come there instead of reporting to the guildmaster. Abel claimed he had only been guiding some beginners who needed help, but the stern Lynn ordered Warren to take him away. The large man carried Abel on his back as he screamed like a child. Lynn then began staring at Ryou with jealous eyes. Feeling uncomfortable, Ryou asked what she wanted. The priestess Lihia stepped in, telling Lynn to stop and apologizing to Ryou for the disturbance. As the party walked away, Idu and Nils excitedly fanboyed over them. But Ryou couldn't understand what they found so impressive about what he saw as a bunch of buffoons. Meanwhile, Rhea scolded Lynn for staring at Ryou. Lynn replied that she was just curious since Abel often spoke highly of his magic skills. Rhea admitted to being curious as well. Abel assured them that they would see Ryou's true capabilities soon enough. The next day, Ryou and Ammon returned to the dungeon and encountered monster dogs. Ryou restrained the creatures with icicle lances while Ammon, showing his skills as a swordsman, managed to defeat a couple of them. During their break, Ryou commented that Ammon's sword style reminded him of Abel's. Ammon explained that his teacher had been an old man named Kiro, who had studied swordsmanship at a prestigious school in the capital. Ryou speculated that Abel must have trained at the same school and noted that Ammon showed potential to become strong. Ammon was impressed by Ryou's understanding of swordplay despite Ryou being a mage. Ryou explained that he had practiced under a mentor but had ultimately developed his own style. He remarked that Ammon's technique seemed exhausting but was also very safe. All he needed to do was work on his stamina. He added that during their travels, Abel would always practice his sword form first thing in the morning, which showed that even the most talented individuals needed to train diligently. Ammon felt inspired by this and resolved to work harder. Ryou was pleased by his determination. The following day, Ryou visited the library and was surprised by its vast size. That is what she said. In any case, he asked the librarian to direct him to the alchemy section, and she guided him to the beginner's collection. Faced with an overwhelming number of options, Ryou decided to step outside for a break. Suddenly, the sky darkened as a total solar eclipse occurred. Ryou, lacking eye protection like a reckless relative, stared directly at it. Within seconds, he sensed that something was wrong. Everyone around him had vanished, and the atmosphere had shifted drastically. Then, out of nowhere, he detected an incoming attack from behind. He reacted quickly, blocking the powerful fire blast with a wall of ice. As he turned, he saw a demonic woman approaching with swagger like she had stepped out of a video game. She seemed amused to see a human in her domain and decided to have some fun defeating him. Ryou immediately understood that he was facing a demon, and not just any demon, but likely the most powerful being he had encountered in this world. He realized escape wasn't an option in this strange space and resolved to fight back. Summoning dozens of ice shields, he managed to block her massive firestorm. The demon swiftly changed tactics, launching an invisible wind bullet that pierced his defenses. Thankfully, it was stopped by his armor. She was baffled that a human's armor could block her magic, but then noticed that Ryou was wearing the Fairy King's robe. Realizing his strength, she decided to switch to melee combat. Drawing her sword, she advanced, and Ryou responded by summoning his own ice blade. He took a defensive stance as she relentlessly attacked, her speed forcing him to dodge a deadly strike to the face. Seeking a counter, Ryou unleashed hundreds of icicle lances, which the demon dodged effortlessly. She didn't notice the solar eclipse nearing its end as she toyed with him. Ryou observed that she was using wind magic to enhance her speed. When she jumped at him for a finishing blow, he blocked it without much trouble. Though she was fast, her strikes were nothing compared to those of the headless knight who had trained him. The demon was intrigued and demanded to know who he was, curious about the Fairy King's robe and sword. She conjured a fireball, but Ryou instantly canceled it with an icicle lance. Enraged, she decided to end the battle quickly, fearing his potential. She attacked ferociously, but Ryou parried with confidence. Spotting an opening, he knocked her off balance and launched a barrage of icicle lances. She created a wall of fire to defend herself, and as the intensity rose, she added rock walls for protection. Ryou changed tactics, using high-pressure water jets to cut through the barriers and injure her. She was shocked to be wounded, but was fortunate that Ryou couldn't see her through the smoke and was attacking blindly. As he moved in for the kill, she leaped at him, blocking his strike. During their mid-air clash, Ryou noticed her wounds healing rapidly. Distracted, he was slammed into a building. Before she could finish him, boiling water began falling from the sky. She screamed in pain as a drop scalded her and quickly encased herself in a stone sphere to wait out the searing rain. Meanwhile, Ryou descended safely. Suddenly, the demoness unleashed a massive flame explosion, destroying everything nearby. She approached Ryou menacingly, but her sword disintegrated as sunlight touched it, marking the end of the eclipse. She acknowledged that they wouldn't be finishing their fight today. Ryou told her to get the hell out, and she didn't seem offended by his tone. She introduced herself as Leonore and asked for his name. Ryou reluctantly gave it, making it clear he had no interest in learning more about demons. Leonore was surprised that he knew about demons and regretted not killing him when she had the chance. She promised they would fight again, but warned that he might meet another demon before that. She told him not to die, as she intended to finish him herself next time. Ryou was stunned by her words, and as the eclipse ended, everything returned to normal, erasing any sign of the battle. Feeling strange, Ryou decided to buy a few books and rest. First, he went to the bank to withdraw money from the sale of the Wyvern magic stones, then returned to his dorm. He noticed his friends weren't in their room, but as he was leaving, he found them being bullied by some adventurers. Mills and Ado accused the attackers of cowardice, saying they had been ambushed while injured. The leader, Dan, replied that monsters wouldn't show mercy in the dungeon either. Suddenly, Dan's lackeys were knocked out cold as Ryou struck them from behind. He told Dan he was absolutely right, but should listen to his own advice. Ryou asked Dan if he was ready to run now that his friends were down. Dan charged, but Ryou sidestepped and struck him in the gut with his sword hilt, making him vomit his breakfast. Afterward, Ryou healed his friends and told them they needed to work on their stamina so no one could catch them off guard again. But first, he said, they should recover and relax. They visited the public bath, where the priest Ito healed the wound Ryou had received from the wind bullet. Everyone wondered who could have injured someone as strong as Ryou, but he chose not to tell them about the demon encounter, at least not yet. For now, he just wanted to unwind. Soon after that, Ammon, Mills, and Ito began going to the dungeon as a team. While Mills and Ammon fought goblins, Ito stayed in the back to support them, healing their injuries when needed. Mills collected the magic stones from the goblins while Ito healed Ammon, and they talked about how dangerous it had been to encounter certain goblins. Mills said they should retreat because going further would be dangerous. Ito agreed, stating that they shouldn't have encountered goblin archers on the 4th floor of the dungeon. Ammon, on the other hand, wanted to hunt more monsters to earn some money, but Niels recalled what Abel had told them: never risk their lives for something unimportant. In the end, they returned to the surface, which turned out to be the best decision of the day. Just a few floors below, a group of adventurers had been wiped out by a huge and powerful monster. Back on the surface, Ryou reflected on how Leonore's magic was extraordinary, but he believed he matched her in casting speed. He decided to sharpen his strengths and eliminate his weaknesses, remembering how he couldn't keep up with Leonore's movement speed the day before. Although he felt jealous of her wind magic, he resolved not to envy her and instead create his own solutions. He thought he might use a water jet to propel himself forward. He had used it underwater before but wasn't sure it would work on land. He first created an icy platform in front of himself. Then, he used hundreds of small water jets from his back to push himself forward. Unfortunately, he moved no faster than an elderly woman at a crosswalk. Ryou was disappointed with the result, but he chose to label it a work in progress. Much like his mental health, he joked. He then went to the library to study more about demons and alchemy. At the same time, Lynn, wizard from Abel's party, was also studying there. She searched for records of a spell powerful enough to create an ice wall thick enough to crush golems, but couldn't find anything. She felt satisfied, wanting to believe Ryou was merely a fraud who had tricked Abel, and thought that only the strongest wizard on the continent could use such spells. As she returned the book to the shelf, she saw the elf girl Syrah. The two greeted each other and made small talk before Syrah remembered she had to return to her group. Meanwhile, Ammon and the others returned to the guild. Nils began stuttering like a nervous fan when he saw the receptionist Nina. Ado gave him a playful smack on the head and told Nina that they had encountered goblin archers on the 5th floor, an unusual occurrence, and that they had rushed back to report it. Nina confirmed the magic stones and hurried off to inform the guildmaster, thanking the team for their valuable report. Hugh the guildmaster was not pleased to hear that goblins had been found on the 5th floor, as they were typically located below the 10th. He suspected that this could signal a larger problem and told Nina to summon all B-rank and higher-ranked adventuring parties. Nina responded that only 2 high-ranking parties were currently in the city, Abel's Crimson Sword and the White Brigade. Soon, Abel and his team headed to Hugh's office. Abel was irritated by the idea of working with the White Brigade because he didn't like their leader. The girls teased him to stop whining, and he calmed down before entering. Phelps, the White Brigade's leader, was already there, and Abel struggled not to show his dislike. Once seated, Hugh explained that goblins had been discovered on the 5th floor and confirmed that the report was reliable. He said both Crimson Sword and White Brigade needed to investigate the dungeon for signs of a monster outbreak. He noted that the last outbreak had occurred 10 years ago, and even though it seemed early, another might be starting. He offered them 100 gold coins in advance and another 200 upon completion. Abel asked if the mission was purely investigative. Hugh confirmed it was. Phelps then asked what they should do if an outbreak had already started. Hugh instructed them to return to the surface immediately if that were the case. The guild would seal off the dungeon and coordinate with the knights. He added that he had already informed both the Lord and the Knights' headquarters, as a full-scale response would be needed if this was truly an outbreak. He asked both parties if they would accept the mission, and they immediately agreed. The next day, Ryou got ready to visit the Northern Library as his roommates were waking up. He told them he planned to study alchemy and had heard the Northern Library contained more advanced material. Ito confirmed this and added that D-rank and above adventurers had access to it. Ammon said he had heard rumors that forbidden books were also stored there. Ryou was excited to hear that, but Ito informed him that only B-rank adventurers could access the restricted texts. The boys wished him luck in his quest for knowledge as they prepared for another dungeon run. Ryou soon arrived at the Northern Library and immediately liked the atmosphere. As he browsed, he thought that asking directly for books about demons might alarm others. Just then, while climbing to the first floor, he saw the elf girl Sira and was instantly taken with her. Meanwhile, Hugh and the two elite parties reached the dungeon's entrance. As they were about to open the door, Abel stopped Hugh, saying something felt wrong. He asked Lynn to use wind magic to scan the first floor, and she detected hundreds of monsters just beyond the gate. Everyone panicked, as this confirmed a monster outbreak had already begun. Hugh ordered a full retreat and instructed them to contact both the knights and the guild. Back at the guild, Nils and the others saw the dungeon closure notice and assumed it was due to the goblin archers. Just then, a man burst in to announce that a monster outbreak had started and that all adventurers must head to the walls surrounding the dungeon to fight. At the same time, Ryou and Sira had been staring at each other. Sira finally said that they were meeting again. After introducing themselves, she asked if Ryou was searching for something specific. Ryou almost mentioned demons, but instead said he was studying alchemy to create golems. Sira was impressed, noting that creating golems was difficult. She told him that no books focused solely on that subject, but offered to guide him to the most useful ones, saying she knew the library well. As they walked, they discussed books and adventuring. Sira revealed that she was the only member of a B-rank party called Wind. Ryou mentioned a friend had told him there was only one elf in the city. Sira explained that elves generally didn't mingle with humans, but she was an exception. Meanwhile, all adventurers had assembled at the dungeon walls. Soon, the monsters broke through the heavy gate. Hugh ordered everyone to attack using magic and arrows, starting a fierce battle against the goblin army. The knights arrived shortly after, and although the situation seemed under control, Hugh remained uneasy. There were more monsters than during the last outbreak. Abel's party eventually ran out of arrows, but Nils brought them a full barrel along with a message from Hugh. Abel's group was tasked with taking down the boss monster after the mob wave. Soon, nearly all goblins were eliminated, and Hugh gave the order for Abel and Phelps to lead their teams into the next phase of the battle. They leapt down from the wall, with Lynn slowing their descent using wind magic. They rushed forward, eliminating the remaining goblins, and waited at the door for the boss to appear. A goblin general emerged, and they believed the battle would end with his defeat. Then two more goblin generals came out, and Abel realized they were facing a goblin king. He instructed them to defeat the generals before the king arrived, or the enemy forces would grow too powerful. Abel and Phelps took on a general each, while Lynn and Licha targeted the third. During the clash, Abel severed his opponent's arms. Suddenly, the Goblin King appeared at the entrance, and Abel shouted for everyone to get down. A powerful wind slash erupted from the dungeon, killing the Goblin generals instantly. Everyone was stunned by the Goblin King's sheer power and ruthlessness. Abel and Phelps knew they were the only ones capable of fighting it. They attacked together, but their weapons failed to pierce the king's armor. Abel rushed forward, using his ghost skill to avoid attacks. He reached the king and tried to pierce its heart, but failed. The Goblin King counterattacked, but Abel vanished again and shouted to Lynn to finish the job. Her wind spears struck true, bringing down the Goblin King. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but they were unaware that something even more dangerous was still lurking within the dungeon. And that was where the video ended. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Later that day, Ryou returned to the guild and found everyone unusually hyped up, while Hugh was buried under a mountain of paperwork. He was sulking in his office, burdened with the task of updating the local lord and the knight commander about the recent monster outbreak. On top of that, he had to pay all the adventurers who participated in the battle, assess their performance, send invoices to the royal capital for funds, and plan the repair of the damaged facilities, all while keeping up with his regular duties. The only relief was that the dungeon would be closed for a month, sparing him from worrying about that, though he knew it would create a new set of problems. Meanwhile, Ryou learned from his friends that the monster outbreak in the dungeon had been handled thanks to the top two parties. This explained the festive atmosphere, which he thought was well justified. Mills began praising Abel's skills, recounting how he had fought the Goblin King, while Ito mentioned that Lin had delivered the finishing blow with Bullet Rain, the highest level wind magic. Ammon noted that Abel had dodged the attack without moving and wondered how he had managed it. At that moment, Abel arrived and explained that he had used a sword skill called Perfect Shadow, which allowed him to evade all ranged attacks. Mills and the others became starstruck, while Abel also complimented them for their help. Ryou, deep in thought, marveled at the genius behind naming the skill. Soon, Lin and Lihia arrived searching for Abel, claiming they had known he would be with Ryou. Though their words sounded sweet, Ryou sensed a hint of hostility. Lin suddenly asked him if he could really create a wall of ice. Ryou confirmed, explaining that his limit was a cube with a 40-meter edge, which left Lin incredulous. He told her it had not been easy to learn and master, but he had managed it somehow. When Lin asked if it was an original spell, Ryou admitted he did not even know what that meant. She explained that most spells were cast by reciting incantations, but Ryou replied that incantations were merely a personal preference. Lin struggled to comprehend this, but before she could ask more, Niels reminded Ryou that the food was getting cold, prompting him to rush to the food counter. Lin, confused, learned from Abel that Ryou believed incantations were used mainly because they sounded cool, and that he could cast magic without them, a notion she found bizarre. Soon after, jobs at the guild became scarce. Niels and his friends stared at the empty notice board, realizing that all available quests had already been taken. Ryou arrived and learned that the job market had been struggling since the dungeon had been temporarily closed. The boys asked if he was there for a quest, and he explained that he needed to buy magic copper ore for his alchemy experiments. They were shocked, knowing how expensive magic ore was, but recognized that Ryou's wealth made it trivial. Seeing their struggle to find work, Ryou decided to help and offered them a job mining magic copper ore. Mills informed him of an abandoned mine near the city, which pleased Ryou. He promised to pay the boys 4 gold coins each just for taking up the job, and 25 gold coins per piece of copper ore, with the only condition that they all return home safely. The boys were thrilled. Such earnings would surpass what they could make in a year through normal job. They questioned if Ryou could really pay that much, and he assured them it was still cheaper than the market rate. The boys left for the job, and Ryou returned to his room, but soon heard disturbing voices from the street. He saw a group of knights attempting to drag a woman away, with an adventurer trying to stop them. Ryou watched as the knights became aggressive, and one drew his sword to strike the adventurer, only to slip inexplicably. When he demanded to know what had caused him to fall, the adventurer jokingly said it must have been John Cena, which only made him angrier. At that moment, Phelps appeared, ordering the knights to back off if they wished to avoid punishment. They challenged his authority, but Phelps revealed that he was not just an adventurer, but a noble of the Heinlein family. One knight realized this was the family of the previous commander of the Royal Knights, and Phelps clarified that he was speaking of his father. He warned them not to tarnish the reputation of knights, prompting them to flee. Phelps then commended the adventurer for his bravery and asked him to escort the woman to safety. Later, Phelps noticed Ryou at his window and introduced himself as the leader of the White Brigade, mentioning that he had heard of Ryou's exceptional magic. Ryou panicked, thinking Phelps had seen him using magic earlier, but he assured himself that Phelps was referring only to Abel's accounts. As they spoke, Phelps' secretary arrived to take him away, demonstrating considerable strength, leaving Ryou impressed. Ryou later had dinner alone when Abel joined him, noting how rare it was to see him unaccompanied. Abel decided to share a secret, enlisting Ryou's help as they ventured into the entertainment district. Abel revealed that the captain of knights was his friend, and he had asked Abel to retrieve the troublesome knights who had run off to have fun. As Ryou understood the situation, he noticed some shady masked adventurers and alerted Abel, saying he had never seen them before, not even at the welcome party. Abel explained that many traveling adventurers came because of the dungeon, but Ryou reminded him that the dungeon was closed. The masked adventurers noticed them and attempted to lure them into a trap. Ryou and Abel followed willingly, but when the thugs tried to ambush them, Ryou knocked them out with heavy ice stones. Abel picked up an alchemy tool the thugs had dropped and offered Ryou, but Ryou declined, saying it was evident. He then tied up the thugs, discovering they were C-ranked adventurers from another country. Abel decided to inform the city guards and resume his mission to find the errant knights, unaware that the adventurers were targeting Phelps in revenge. However, the secretary paralyzed them with poison needles and cast a fire spell that incinerated the knights completely. The next day, a research team arrived from the capital to study the dungeon following the monster outbreak. Hugh immediately clashed with their leader, Clive, over his unreasonable demands. Clive expected the city of Lune to provide food and supplies to his entire group despite shortages, and also demanded access to the dungeon for research. Hugh argued that opening it so soon was foolish, but Clive insisted he had full authority from the newly appointed Minister of Dungeon Exploration. Their debate reached a deadlock, prompting the wise old mage to intervene. He suggested that the food issue would be addressed next time, and that the city could accommodate them this time. Regarding the dungeon, he proposed a condition. If the city or its citizens were harmed by opening it, the ministry would take responsibility. Clive was furious, but Hugh refused to open the dungeon without agreement. The old mage convinced Clive to accept, arranging for skilled adventurers to guard the mission. Meanwhile, Ryou visited the inn where Abel and his party stayed, curious about the food. Just as he approached, a girl ran out, asking him to take her to the Adventurer Guild with an urgent message. Though hungry, Ryou agreed. The girl delivered a letter from his teacher in the royal capital, requesting his assistance for the research party exploring the dungeon. Abel was hesitant, recalling that years ago a powerful A-rank party had entered a dungeon shortly after an outbreak and never returned. Ryou suggested declining if necessary and returned to the inn for lunch. The girl introduced herself as Natalie, a novice mage from a family renowned for water magic. Lynn asked if she had heard of a spell to cast ice wall high in the air, to which Natalie replied she was just beginning to learn magic. When she asked who could perform such spells, they told her Ryou could. Surprised, Natalie listened as Abel praised Ryou again, instructing his party never to fight him, and advising Natalie to seek Ryou's help if needed. The next day, the research team prepared to enter the dungeon, and Abel agreed to guard them. He recalled knowing the old mage and discussed a mana detector tool that transmitted dungeon mana signals to the analysis team stationed outside. 3 days later, the research team reached the dungeon's 7th floor but found nothing unusual. Clive and his Royal Academy team, however, seemed eager to find something, but Abel chose to ignore them. Meanwhile, lower-ranked adventurers outside received updates about dungeon developments and available quests, while it remained off-limits. Ryou asked Hugh about the color of the magic stones dropped by monsters during the outbreak. Hugh acknowledged it as an excellent observation, noting that goblins had dropped yellow stones instead of green. Suddenly, Clive and his team discovered a suspicious gate in the dungeon emitting strange energy. Believing it to be a portal, they set up equipment around it. As they attempted to touch it, everyone vanished, and Natalie, monitoring readings, was shocked as the signals stopped. Fortunately, all had been teleported to the same location, and Abel confirmed the safety of his team before uniting with the senior mage. Clive instructed his men to carefully examine the strange grassland they had arrived in, warning them of unknown dangers. His right-hand man arrived, asking what to do next. Clive had no idea, but at least his theory that the monsters came from the 38th floor of the dungeon had been proven wrong. He now realized that the monsters had emerged from this strange place beyond the gate. He thought it was a remarkable discovery, one that could help him rise to the position of minister in no time. As he grinned to himself, another researcher pointed out some figures on the horizon, which looked like creepy Pokemon-like creatures. Meanwhile, Natalie and the data collection team worried about the lost signal. Suddenly, the signal returned, briefly, showing that the exploration team had reached the 40th floor, but it vanished immediately again. At that moment, a man named Christopher arrived, introducing himself as a representative of the Magic College. He asked the researchers from the academy what they had discovered and urged them to share whatever information they could, despite the rivalry between their organizations. Christopher explained that a few minutes earlier, people entering the dungeon had vanished, and if the situation was not understood quickly, it could be too late. The researchers were shocked. and Christopher elaborated that he had hired adventurers to explore the dungeon, but as he was about to follow them, they had all disappeared. The researchers verified that their own team had vanished moments ago as well, with their signal briefly reappearing on the 40th floor. Christopher was astonished because no one had ever progressed past the 38th floor, and even B-ranked parties struggled beyond the 30th floor. The researchers informed him that Abel's party was guarding the team, and Christopher said he had already contacted the guildmaster for assistance. Natalie panicked, realizing that the situation might be beyond anyone's capability to solve. In this desperate moment, her only hope was Ryou, as Abel had advised her to seek him out if no one else could help. She immediately ran to find him, leaving everyone confused. Meanwhile, news of the research party vanishing reached Hugh, who panicked. He rushed to the dungeon entrance and instructed the receptionist to prepare everyone on standby, but not to reveal anything until he could confirm the situation firsthand. At the same time, Ryou wandered the library, unable to find any helpful books. As he climbed to the first floor, he half-jokingly wished to see the elf Sierra again, and the universe answered. Sierra spotted him while returning some books. Ryou eagerly approached her, and in conversation, he revealed that he was searching for records of past eclipses and monster outbreaks to compare them. Sierra told him she knew exactly where those documents were and instructed him to follow her. On the way, Sierra listened to Ryou's theory connecting solar eclipses and monster outbreaks and agreed with him. She had witnessed many dungeon outbreaks, coinciding with solar eclipses, but had never seen a total solar eclipse like the one from a few days ago. Curious about Ryou's reasoning, she questioned him, and he nervously avoided mentioning that he had fought a demon during the eclipse, instead changing the topic to the colors of magic stones dropped by monsters. Sierra explained that the main factor was the age of the monster. Ryou noted that he had learned that from Abel, and mentioned his curiosity about the yellow-colored magic stones found during the recent outbreak. Sierra was puzzled, as only recently born monsters had pale stones, and she had assumed that the outbreak involved old and powerful dungeon monsters. Ryou agreed, reasoning that weaker goblins were a different matter, but goblin generals and the Goblin King could not leave the dungeon immediately after spawning. He suspected something unnatural had occurred, noting that artificially creating such a horde would require an enormous amount of mana. Sierra recalled reading records of magic stones from a previous outbreak, which were pale yellow, and offered Ryou access to old, damaged records. He gladly accepted, and she led him to a lesser-known section of the library. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, Abel continued discussing the teleportation incident with the senior mage. No one knew their exact location, but the senior mage confirmed that their mana detector tools were functioning, assuming the data collection team could send help. However, he doubted help would arrive in time. He asked Ligia if the location seemed familiar, prompting her to think intensely and realize it resembled being inside a sanctuary square, the highest-level defensive magic. She explained that only the most powerful priests could use it, and it was considered a divine miracle capable of blocking any attack. Abel understood that if they were inside such a barrier, they could not escape, nor could anyone enter to assist them. The senior mage agreed, and Ligia remarked that if they could not find the barrier's end, it must be enormous. Abel realized the situation had worsened and instructed Lynn to use her wind magic to detect nearby monsters. She complied, sensing a group of around 1,000 humans and approximately 50 unknown creatures. Abel and the mage deduced that the humans were likely Clive and his group and decided to meet them, unaware of the creatures accompanying them. Meanwhile, Hugh reached the dungeon entrance and met Christopher and the researchers. Hearing that, the research team had been found on the 40th floor. He despaired, knowing that even all the town's adventurers could not rescue them. Christopher confirmed that he could not risk entering the dungeon either, and Hugh reluctantly agreed, praying for Abel and the others' safety. Back inside, Clive and his men were under attack by unknown enemies. Some hid under barriers, while the rest were hunted by balls of purple hellfire. The attackers emerged into the light, revealing themselves as devils, a species distinct from demons. Clive, familiar only from books, knew their danger. Adventurers not protected by barriers attempted to fight them, but were swiftly destroyed. By the time Abel and his group arrived, only Clive and a few men remained alive. Ligia and the senior mage identified the devils and panicked, as devils were reputedly immune to magic and far stronger than humans. Lygia doubted they could prevail, but the senior mage ordered an attack regardless. The mages launched a full assault, seriously injuring the devils. Lygia was surprised that magic could harm them, and the old mage clarified that their immunity was never verified and had been speculative. He instructed the mages to continue attacking, though they would soon exhaust their mana. Abel spotted a boss monster among the devils and realized they had to defeat it to resolve the situation. After a few more rounds, the mages ran out of magic, prompting Abel to charge ahead with his party. Warren blocked the devils' attacks while the others dispatched them quickly. Their teamwork allowed them to defeat many devils, but Lynn ran out of magic, requiring Lygia and Warren to cover for her. Abel noted that only 6 devils remained, including the boss monster. Lygia suggested it might be a demon prince destined to awaken as a demon lord. Abel asked if she was certain, and she explained that different colored eyes were a hallmark of demon princes, and only heroes had ever defeated them. Abel resolved to take the risk, planning to defeat the other devils even if he could not subdue the boss. He encouraged Lygia not to lose hope, asserting that miracles could happen. The demons attacked. Abel quickly dispatched a few, but the demon prince targeted his party, attempting to scatter them from the battlefield. Approaching Abel for a one-on-one, his speed alone was intimidating. The demon prince shoved Abel aside with a single sword swing and closed in again. Clive and his group attacked, but their magic had no effect. The minions fired projectiles, destroying their shields and forcing them to retreat. Abel decided to risk everything, activating a skill to dodge the enemy attack at super speed. He parried the demon prince's sword and attacked, but the prince evaded and struck Abel's shoulder, knocking him to the ground. As the demon prince raised his sword to finish him, Lygia cried out in fear. Suddenly, Ryou arrived, breaking through the roof of the 40th floor. Everyone was surprised. Ryou asked if Abel was injured, joked about it, and suggested returning home, assuring them he would handle the enemy. Abel, astonished at Ryou's timely arrival, protested that they could not retreat with such a powerful foe ahead. Ryou confidently stated he would deal with it. Abel panicked, explaining that the enemy was a demon prince, and Ryou casually referred to it as a baby demon lord, implying its weakness. No one could comprehend Ryou's thought process as he advanced. The lesser devils attempted to attack him, but he neutralized their projectiles with icicle lances. He then unleashed a water jet, instantly decapitating them, and confronted the demon prince. Drawing his sword, Ryou told the demon prince to finish the fight quickly, as he did not have all day. Earlier, Natalie had realized that Abel and the others were trapped on the 40th floor and had immediately run to find Ryou. Natalie could not find Ryou in his dorm room, and his roommates told her that he could be found in the Northside library. She didn't even know where Northside was, but once she got directions from the boys, she ran to find him. Luckily, she met him along the way and immediately urged him to head to the dungeon because Abel and his team were in danger. Ryou decided to get the details on the way and quickly placed her in a carriage made of ice. As he dragged the carriage toward the dungeon gate, he learned about the disappearances within the dungeon, though he was curious why Natalie had approached him. She explained that Abel had asked her to contact Ryou if she needed help, and he was not around. Ryou immediately understood the assignment and rushed toward the dungeon gate. The guards attempted to stop him, insisting that no one was allowed inside, but Ryou easily created ice walls to cut them off and entered without resistance. Realizing that it would take too long to reach the 40th floor by normal means, he used water jets to carve a faster path to his destination. Soon, he found himself standing in front of the demon prince, inviting the monster to make the first move. As the demon prince attacked, Ryou sidestepped and swiftly hacked its neck cleanly. He noted that the monster was rather slow, pleased that the fight ended quickly. However, the demon prince simply picked up its head and reattached it, prompting Ryou to test just how much the creature could regenerate. He immediately created hundreds of water jets, chopping the demon prince into tiny pieces. One of the jets destroyed its magic stone, reducing it to dust. Abel was shocked to witness Ryou casually demolishing a demon prince. He thanked Ryou for saving everyone, and the ever nonchalant Ryou asked him to repay the favor by taking him to dinner that night. Abel, in turn, insisted that Ryou could have dinner with him for the entire week, much to Ryou's satisfaction. Lihia then arrived and hugged Abel tightly, while Warren carried the unconscious Rin to safety. The senior mage approached to thank Ryou for his intervention, and Ryou humbly replied that he had been lucky to arrive in time. He also noticed the casualties, and Abel suggested that they harvest the magic stones from the devils to support the families of the deceased. Ryou liked the idea but focused on the devils themselves. Abel explained that everyone present had seen devils for the first time, as they had not approached humans in centuries. Ryou grew curious about the difference between demons and devils, but decided to consider it later. He mentioned that while on the 39th floor, he had scanned the nearby area and found something strange near the stairs, suggesting that they check it on the way back. Everyone agreed. Before leaving, they extracted the magic stones from the devil, which were unusually dark. Even the senior mage had never seen such stones. Ligia noted that no museums or church libraries contained magic stones from devils, and the senior mage added that devils supposedly possess space-time magic, appearing out of nowhere. Ryou began suspecting that some information was missing. Elsewhere, a party led by the hero, Roman, discovered a dark altar and attempted to summon the demon lord. Instead, a demoness named Leonore appeared. Surprised by humans mistaking her for the demon lord, she was intrigued when she heard that Roman was the hero meant to defeat the demon lord. She briefly entertained the fight, quickly skewering Roman with her sword. Bored, she took the black stone atop the altar as her loot. The other adventurers, terrified, obeyed her command to heal Roman, who continued cursing her while still calling her the demon lord. Leonore clarified that she was far more powerful than the demon lord and told Roman that his party might defeat the current demon lord, but were not strong enough to challenge her. She recounted meeting Ryou, someone equally strong, and advised Roman to become 1,000 times stronger if he wished to reach her level before vanishing through a portal. Back in Ryou's dungeon, the party discovered a cracked black sphere similar to the one Leonore had taken. Curious but lacking information, the old mage decided to take it to the surface for investigation. Once on the surface, Hugh was relieved to see Abel and his party alive, but intended to discuss Ryou's actions. He asked Ryou why he had trapped the guards in ice walls and entered the dungeon, but Ryou meekly apologized. The old mage defended him, noting that had Ryou not arrived in time, everyone would have died. Hugh was shocked, but agreed to hear the full details later, choosing to thank Ryou for saving lives. The old mage informed Hugh that they had encountered 50 devils on the 40th floor, including a demon prince. Hugh was terrified imagining the ordeal, recognizing that Abel's party alone could not have managed the threat. Ryou's timely intervention had made all the difference. The old mage advised that Ryou should be their top priority and suggested leaving his name out of official records to protect him from interfering nobles, with Hugh agreeing. The next morning, Ryou led his roommates in morning exercise, quickly leaving them behind and returning to the city. The smell of curry drew him to a restaurant, where he unexpectedly met Sira. While eating, she asked about his rank and other matters. Afterward, Ryou inquired why she never visited the guild despite being an adventurer. She explained that she worked as a swordsmanship instructor for the local knights and had no need for guild interactions. Ryou was surprised, and she added that she was stronger than she appeared. Sira invited Ryou for a sparring session, which he accepted, still feeling unsatisfied after his battle with the demon prince. At the knights' barracks, they took their stances, and Sira charged at him. Ryou struggled to keep up, but managed to block and counter her attacks. Impressed, Sira became serious, attacking with even greater speed, forcing Ryou to retreat and ultimately snapping his sword. Accepting defeat, he was suddenly hugged by Sira, who praised his skill and inquired where he had learned swordsmanship. Ryou revealed that the Fairy King had trained him, surprising Sira, as the Fairy King was mostly considered a myth. Just then, Sira's maid arrived to call her for lessons with the local lord's grandson. Sira left, asking the maid to take good care of Ryou, which led the poor girl to assume they were dating. Outside, Hugh arrived in a carriage after returning from a meeting with the lord. He told Ryou to get in for a discussion about his recent actions. Ryou, nervous about being scolded, was relieved when Hugh said the old mage had explained everything and he would overlook the incident. As a nominal punishment for breaking rules, Ryou was assigned a mandatory guild quest to escort merchants to another city. A few days later, Niels approached Ryou in their dorm, formally requesting wanting his help. Ryou asked what the issue was, and Niels explained that his village had a request for hunting monsters. However, the quest was available only for D-ranked adventurers, while everyone in their group except Ryou was E rank or lower. Niels pleaded with Ryou to form a temporary party to complete the mission. Ammon mentioned that they would face goblins and skeletons, which should not be difficult. Ido noted that goblins and skeletons usually inhabit different areas, causing Ryou to laugh, as he had never faced skeletons in this world. He decided to take the quest just to encounter skeletons. The entire group immediately headed to the guild. Hugh asked if they were certain about taking the quest since the village was not nearby, but Niels was determined to help his people. Hugh explained that 2 parties had already been sent to deal with the monsters. The first an E-rank party, the second D-rank, but both had failed. Everyone was shocked to hear that even a D-ranked party had failed to defeat some goblins and skeletons, but Hugh explained that there had been another issue. He said the D-ranked party reported that the villagers had not cooperated with them at all. Niels found this odd, as the people in his village were not usually hostile. Hugh decided to let the boys take the job, sympathizing with them as someone from a small village himself. However, he warned them that the mission could be dangerous, and that Priest Ito would be crucial to their party's success, as he was the only one capable of healing them. He also mentioned that Ryou had only a few days left before his mandatory escort mission began, and that he could complete this quest beforehand. The next day, Ryou and his friends set out for the village of Kalayati and reached it quickly, thanks to their greatly improved stamina from running daily. The villagers greeted Niels warmly, which surprised Ryou, who had assumed Niels had been exiled for being a troublemaker. Niels was annoyed by the remark but couldn't stay mad, knowing Ryou was partly right. Niels led the group to village chief Bulan, who was genuinely glad to see him. After introducing his friends, Niels and Bulan discussed the monster hunting quest. Bulan suggested that things might go more smoothly this time, since Niels knew the village customs. Curious about the D-ranked party's report, Niels asked if the villagers had truly refused to cooperate with them. Bulan began recounting the story, starting with the moment he first noticed skeleton monsters. He explained that when the E-ranked party had first arrived, they had ventured too deeply into the eastern forest, a place forbidden to villagers. They had been injured and had returned on their own. When the D-ranked party came afterward, the villagers no longer trusted outsiders and refused them shelter, which caused their failure. Niels understood the villagers' reactions, but realized his friends could not follow without context. Since this information was a village secret, he told them they would have to wait until he obtained permission from the village council. That night, the group stayed at Niels's house, where his younger brother and sister welcomed them. They reminisced about how Niels had always wanted to become an adventurer, but had stayed behind to care for them after their parents died. Later, Niels returned from his meeting with the council, informing his friends that he had been granted permission to reveal the village secrets. He asked them to keep it confidential. He explained that their village had 2 special features. First, it had a guardian beast living in the eastern forest. Ryou immediately imagined that the guardian beast might be possessed by an evil god, as he had seen in anime, and would have to fight it. Niels snapped him out of his daydream and explained that the village's second special feature was the shrine, which the village elder would show them personally the next day. The following day, Bulan led Ryou and the group to the area where goblins had been spotted. Ito and Ammon discovered goblin footprints and suspected a nearby nest. Ryou sensed approaching goblins, and Niels suggested they kill all but one, so that the survivor could lead them to the goblin settlement. When the goblins arrived, Ryou used his ice magic to trap them, allowing his friends to finish them off, sparing one as planned. Following it, they found the lone goblin speaking with others outside a cave. Ryou decided they should eliminate the goblins outside first, using ice to immobilize them while his friends delivered finishing blows. Soon, the goblin general emerged. Terrified, Niels and the others watched as Ryou restrained it with ice chains, allowing Niels to strike the final blow. They successfully killed the goblin general and retrieved its magic stone before returning to the village. The elder greeted them, pleased that the goblins had been dealt with, and led them to the shrine. Ado noticed a peculiar trinket attached to her staff. Meanwhile, Ryou, still imagining the guardian beast possessed by evil, was told by Niels to abandon his strange thoughts. As they entered the forest, Edo inquired about the trinket, recognizing it as the crest of the Earth Mother Goddess. The elder was impressed. Curious, Ryou listened as Ito explained that 7 gods were once worshipped in the country, but now most churches only honored the goddess of light. The village, however, had maintained worship of the Earth Goddess for generations. The elder also revealed that followers of the Earth Goddess could cast healing magic without incantations. When they reached the cave of the guardian beast, the elder called it out. Ryou eagerly anticipated seeing a formidable beast, but a massive talking wolf appeared instead. Loki was disappointed, as it didn't look corrupted. The wolf, introducing himself as Kusan, surprisingly asked for Ryou's name, shocking both the elder and Bulan, as the guardian beast typically never revealed its name. Kusan explained that he was related to the fairies and found Ryou's presence pleasant, which made Ryou realize that the fairy king must have held him in high regard. Kusan welcomed them and explained the quest. 30 skeletons were trapped in the shrine along with a powerful boss he had been holding back. They needed to defeat all minions before confronting him. Edo's light magic quickly dispatched the skeleton. Amon and Niels then opened the shrine gate, revealing the giant boss skeleton. Ryou transformed their swords into ice hammers, instructing them to use them to damage the boss while he immobilized it. He also created an ice flower in the sky to signal Kusan to release the shrine's seal. As the wolf lifted the seal, the skeleton boss charged out. Ryou froze the floor, causing the boss to slip repeatedly, while Amon and Niels relentlessly attacked it until it was defeated. After the battle, the group explored the shrine's interior, which even the elder had never entered. At the end, they found a statue of the Earth Goddess holding a broken sphere. The elder recalled how her predecessor had mentioned the statue once held a shining jewel that had turned black and shattered. The guardian beast had also spoken of a unique mana affecting the cave, suggesting that something unusual had caused the monsters. The elder sealed the shrine with magic to prevent further mana corruption. With the mission complete, the boys returned to Loon, discussing how it had been almost 300 days since they became adventurers, meaning they would soon be evicted from the dorms. Niels and Edo were already planning for that day and invited Amon and Ryou to join them in renting a house. Amon immediately accepted while Ryou hesitated, considering other factors. Back in the city, it was time for Ryou's compulsory escort mission. Coincidentally, all his roommates were escorting the same merchant to Whitnash. Ryou was pleased and learned from Niels that they had formed a party named Room Number 10, a name he found cringeworthy but accepted. Ito and Amon also resigned themselves to the name. They discussed their extended stay in Whitnash, learning that their client would participate in the Open Port Festival held every 5 years. Excited, Ryou and his friends anticipated exploring the festival. Upon reaching Whitnash, the client led them to an inn, allowing the guards 10 days of leisure before returning to Loon. Ryou and Niels raced to the food stalls, with the other two reluctantly following, enjoying the festival's street food, much of which resembled Earth cuisine. The next day, a large line of guests formed outside Whitnash's gates, delayed due to one important guest's paperwork issue. Among those waiting was Oscar, the greatest wizard of the Debussy Empire, who was visibly annoyed. His assistant suggested that the Emperor had sent him along with his youngest daughter, Princess Fiona, to handle delicate matters without her knowledge. The assistant understood Oscar's logic, knowing that the Emperor was a doting parent to Fiona. She was a genius in magic and already commanded the court mages, and the Emperor did not want to reveal his dark and ruthless side to her. Oscar believed that the Emperor probably intended to eliminate some nobles who were plotting rebellion, but he had no proof of this theory. He reasoned, however, that it did not matter because his duty was simply to guard Fiona from danger. Later that night, a party was organized for the visiting nobles, and Fiona attended along with her elder brother Conrad. While Conrad socialized with the guests and handled diplomatic matters, he noticed that his sister looked tired and told her to rest. Fiona gladly took the opportunity to retreat to her room and lie on the bed, preferring training with her troops to attending such a party. The next day, the festival began with a grand procession. Ryou noticed Abel sitting uncomfortably among the special guests, and his friends spotted him as well. Niels began staring at Fiona, prompting Edo to warn him that she was a princess far above his league and that he should stick with the receptionist at the guild for now. Just then, Lin and other members of Abel's party arrived. Ryou asked them what Abel was doing among the VIPs. Lihia explained that Abel was there as a representative of their guild master, who would arrive the next day. Lin noticed a thick wind magic barrier protecting the special guests. Ido was curious because he had expected only a normal magic barrier. Lin told him she had heard stories of a treasure passed down by the family of the Lord of Whitnash, capable of creating a wind barrier, and she believed the stories were true. Ryou grew excited at the idea of a treasure that could cast magic, but Lin explained that it was highly inefficient and only used on special occasions. Lihia agreed, noting that protecting high-ranking nobles and royals from different kingdoms was worth the cost. Ryou hoped that nothing bad would happen during the festival. Lin then turned her attention to Fiona, saying that if the commander of Debussy's magic forces was present, her lieutenant must also be nearby. Ryou grew curious about this lieutenant, and the girls told him legends about the famed Inferno magician, said to have incinerated 1,000 soldiers with a single spell and killed a wyvern with one shot. Lihia admitted they did not know how much of the rumors were true, but she preferred to avoid such a dangerous man. Abel's party soon departed, and Niels suggested to Ryou that they explore the festival as well. Ryou agreed, but as he turned, Oscar passed right by him. They quickly avoided a collision and exchanged polite apologies. Ryou left with his friends while Oscar continued to watch him for a moment. He then focused on buying snacks for the princess, a task that proved exhausting due to the crowd and the constant directions from his assistant. Meanwhile, Abel and Prince Conrad crossed paths. Conrad remarked that Abel resembled someone he used to know, but Abel dismissed the comment and mentioned that he had sat next to Fiona earlier. Despite this, he seemed more interested in Oscar than Fiona, though Conrad excused himself and left abruptly. Princess Fiona returned to her room and lay on the bed once again. Shortly after, Oscar and his assistant delivered the snacks. Oscar was clearly exhausted, not fond of crowds. His assistant mentioned nearly colliding with someone earlier, and Oscar noted that he had reacted quickly enough to avoid a collision. Fiona asked who they were talking about, and Oscar explained it was Ryou, who dressed like a magician but moved like a swordsman. He then served as Fiona's walking microwave, heating the snacks for her, which delighted her. She thanked him and called him her teacher, though Oscar felt uncomfortable with the title. The next day, Ryou and his friends watched an archery competition in which Ammon and Ito participated. They tried to hit floating targets over the sea but failed. Ryou asked Niels if he planned to participate, and Niels proudly admitted he had never used a bow before. Abel arrived and laughed, noting that Niels reminded him of himself back then. Ryou seized the opportunity to push Abel into competing, and although reluctant, Abel hit a bullseye on the farther target. The crowd cheered, but Abel's celebration was cut short when his party members arrived. Lihia smiled coldly, questioning why Abel had not come to her first. Lin then informed Ryou and his friends that Abel had promised to spend the day with Lihia, and now he was in trouble. Lihia dragged him away while Niels fangirled over Abel and Ito began simping over Lihia. Meanwhile, in Lune, Sira searched everywhere for Ryou. When she could not find him, she went to the guild and asked receptionist Nina, who informed her that Ryou was currently away on a quest and would not return for several weeks. Sira was dismayed, having hoped to share new information with him. But now she had to wait. The next day, Ryou and Ito watched a boat race in which Niels and Ammon participated. The race turned chaotic when the bully Dan arrived and immediately clashed with Niels. The rules allowed attacks in the second half of the race, which they exploited, fighting with their oars while their partners tried to finish first. Both broke their oars and stole their partners' oars near the finish line, causing their boats to stall while the trailing boats overtook them. Niels and Dan continued fighting even after losing their weapons, eventually capsizing and falling into the water. They entertained the audience the most and were rewarded, though they argued over it. The following day, Ryou and his friends viewed a futuristic ship that could move without sails or oars. Hugh explained that it ran using alchemy and magic stones, propelled by wind and water magic. They then visited a weapon shop where Ito examined crossbows to increase the party's combat capability. The shop owner demonstrated a semi-automatic crossbow, ideal for providing rapid middle-range cover, which Ito purchased. Afterwards, everyone returned to enjoying the festival. Later that night, Abel attended a party for special guests, while Hugh had returned home. Abel met with Conrad and Fiona, and after they left, he found himself missing his sword, even though the wind barrier made it unnecessary. Unaware, he inadvertently inadvertently jinxed himself and the other guests. Suddenly, a guest called him aside for a private discussion, and at the same time, the treasure responsible for the wind barrier began malfunctioning. Magicians panicked as the barrier failed and assassins attacked, killing some immediately. Fiona sensed the disturbance and turned just as the garden came under assault. Meanwhile, Abel was in a private meeting with the Lord of Whitnash, protected by a soundproof artifact. He wondered why such extreme precautions were necessary. Abel noted that Hugh should have handled the business matters beforehand, and the Lord agreed. He explained that he wanted to discuss the introductory course for rookie adventurers at Loon, which had a high reputation, and intended to implement it at the Whitnash Guild. Abel approved, noting that the course had lowered rookie mortality. The Lord added that instructors should attend the course themselves to learn how to teach beginners. Unaware, they did not realize the artifact also blocked outside sounds. Elsewhere, Oscar and his subordinates were in the market. They asked if he planned to eat, but he replied that he would wait for Fiona to return, preferring an empty stomach for mobility in emergencies. His subordinates noted the Lord's mansion was protected by a wind barrier, assuring him of safety. Oscar reflected on his overprotectiveness toward Fiona, remembering his past. He was born in a small village near the mountains, a natural redhead with innate talent for fire magic. As a child, he helped the village blacksmith control flames and aspired to craft weapons. At home, he assisted his mother by lighting firewood and felt joy in using his ability to help others. One day, the blacksmith gifted him his first sword, informing his father that Oscar was ready to aid the villagers in hunting. Excited, his father took him hunting, but instead of a sword, he instructed him to use a bow. Oscar hit the target once before the hunt ended, and that night, the village held a feast in his honor. While everyone was enjoying themselves, Oscar's father learned from a friend that bandits had been scouting their village and could attack at any moment. The two men discussed how they were seriously outnumbered and had no time to evacuate the villagers. They concluded that their only option was to fight and protect the village. Soon, the men gathered at the village wall, eagerly awaiting the bandits' arrival. When the bandits reached the wall, the villagers began shooting and managed to take down a few attackers. However, the bandit leader quickly understood their strategy and ordered his men to approach and break the wall. Oscar wanted to help the villagers fight, but his father told him to return home and look after his mother while he stayed behind to stop the bandits. The fight continued, but the bandit leader was far stronger than the villagers had anticipated. He leaped over the wall, chopping off an archer's arm, then unlocked the gate, allowing his men to enter. As the full-scale battle erupted, Oscar hid in his house with his mother and other women. The single guard outside was no match for the bandit chief, who broke in easily. Oscar's mother tried to resist but was swiftly slain. Devastated, Oscar launched a fireball at the bandit chief, but it was deflected effortlessly. He then attempted to stab him but was overpowered, and the bandit took his sword. Luckily, his father arrived just in time to stop the bandit from attacking further. Upon seeing his wife dead, he lost all control and attacked the bandit chief in blind rage. The bandit dodged every strike and taunted him to fight outside. Oscar's father rushed after him without thinking, a fatal mistake. He was struck by arrows before he could exit the house, and the bandit stabbed him through the heart. Oscar was traumatized, but before the bandit could attack him, another bandit arrived, warning that a pack of wolves was approaching after smelling the blood. The bandit chief reluctantly retreated. Soon after, the blacksmith came to check on Oscar. Horrified by the scene, he calmed himself to protect Oscar, who had lost all will to live. The blacksmith urged him to survive and become Batman, as that was the best course now. When wolves surrounded the house, the blacksmith instructed Oscar to run to the river, explaining that wolves dislike water. The blacksmith stayed behind to hold them off. Oscar sprinted as fast as he could with two wolves chasing him. As he reached the river, he slipped, dodging their attack, and was carried away by the current. When he woke, he found himself in the house of a wealthy man who had discovered him by the riverside. The kind old man allowed Oscar to grieve his parents and comforted him, noting how rare red hair was. He explained that red hair was considered a blessing from the god of fire and encouraged Oscar, saying great things awaited him. Oscar requested to stay with the man, who agreed on the condition that Oscar pursue an education. Oscar eagerly accepted and asked to learn swordsmanship to grow stronger. A few years later, tragedy struck again. Returning home one night, Oscar discovered the mansion on fire, with a bandit having killed everyone inside. Enraged, Oscar attacked, cutting the bandit's face but was overpowered. The bandit grabbed his head head and stabbed him. As Oscar fell, he recognized the killer as the same man who had murdered his parents. After the bandit and his gang departed, Oscar's hair turned white and he set off alone, severely injured but determined to exact revenge. Back in the present, the Lord's mansion was suddenly bombarded with fireballs, causing massive explosions. Everyone fled and Fiona noticed her brother Conrad was injured. She rushed to him, created a magic barrier, and began treating his wounds, but he insisted he was fine. He urged her to conserve her mana for later, and Fiona led him to a safer location before planning her next move. Meanwhile, the bandits attacked the guests, trapping them inside the mansion. Conrad realized the attackers had locked it down and asked Fiona if she could summon her knights. She replied that she could, but it would reveal their position. Conrad said it was a risk they had to take, and Fiona launched a beacon spell into the sky. Upon seeing it, Oscar and his team rushed to the mansion. Inside, the attackers noticed Conrad and Fiona and called for backup. Conrad realized they were the primary targets and told Fiona that the only way to survive was to eliminate the attackers. The attackers charged, and Conrad used earth magic to take down several. Fiona engaged the rest with fire magic, but Conrad heard someone chanting a powerful spell. He instructed Fiona to use her ultimate defensive spell, which she activated just in time to block a bullet rain, one of the highest-ranked offensive spells. Her barrier protected them both, but Fiona was exhausted. The enemy, still with mana, began casting another high-level spell combining earth and fire magic. Conrad could hear it but could not discern its nature. Fiona focused and realized the spell's intent. Noticing the ground beneath Conrad heating and shaking, she pushed him away just as the enemy cast a volcano spell, sending her flying in a powerful explosion. Oscar and his team arrived in the garden, seeing Fiona thrown into the air. Memories of past trauma flooded his mind. Fiona noticed him and instructed him to protect her brother. Oscar lost his composure and ordered his subordinates to shield Conrad while he rushed to save the princess. Meanwhile, Niels and his friends were waiting for Ryou at the beach. When they saw a pillar of fire erupt over the mansion, they spotted someone falling from the sky. Niels hurried and caught Fiona in time, with Ammon reaching him as well. Ada warned them that they were in danger. Two attackers rushed toward Fiona to finish the job. Ammon blocked them while Ito used his barrier and semi-automatic crossbow to neutralize one attacker. Ammon cut down the second attacker and reunited with Niels. They realized the mansion faced a severe threat and decided to find a safe place for the princess. Oscar also arrived, and seeing Fiona with unfamiliar individuals, assumed they were attackers. Ammon and the others shared the misunderstanding and prepared to defend the princess from Oscar. That is where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Abel came out of the meeting room and was stunned to see the Lord's mansion engulfed in flame. He regretted being in a room with soundproofing magic, which prevented him from noticing what had happened earlier. As he tried to figure out the situation, Prince Conrad spotted him. Meanwhile, back in the city, Ryou noticed the flare sent out by Princess Fiona. He felt mildly disappointed when it vanished, not realizing it was an emergency signal rather than a firework. He assumed someone was simply in a joyful mood and had launched a magic firework. Just then, two assassins targeting Princess Fiona bumped into him, causing him to drop the snacks he had bought. Ryou was annoyed because he had stood in a long queue to get them, but his curiosity was piqued by the two hooded men who seemed to be in a rush. On the beach, Oscar approached Niels and the others, angrily demanding that they release the princess. He began hurling insults, claiming the boys were too filthy to touch her, before launching an attack. Fortunately, Ito foresaw the attack and cast a defensive spell in time to block it. However, the force of Oscar's magic caused Ito to suffer a severe backlash. Oscar continued his assault, firing another round of magic bullets. Ito, with the last of his strength, cast another defensive spell. This time it shattered on impact, but managed to divert the bullets enough to prevent fatal injuries. Exhausted, Ito collapsed unconscious, leaving Ammon to step forward as the last line of defense. Oscar unleashed another barrage of flame bullets, and Ammon braced himself for the worst. Just as the attack was about to land, a thick wall of ice rose up and blocked the flames. The fire mage froze in shock at the sight of his attack being stopped by ice. At that moment, Ryou walked in, his aura radiating stronger with each step. Seeing his injured friends, Ryou's fury erupted, and he demanded an explanation from Oscar. Oscar dismissed him, declaring that no one would stand between him and the princess. He launched another attack at Ammon, summon and the others, but Ryou countered with a volley of icicles. Realizing Ryou posed the greatest threat, Oscar shifted his focus and prepared to fight him seriously. Oscar unleashed powerful fire spells, which Ryou blocked with towering ice walls. Their clash caused a massive explosion, but Ryou emerged unharmed. Oscar was stunned that his magic had failed to destroy the barriers. Ryou declared it was his turn and summoned a storm of icicles from above. Oscar countered with fireballs, but Ryou immediately followed with another round. This time, Oscar cast a high-level spell, conjuring a fiery tornado that incinerated the icicles and struck toward Ryou. As the flames dissipated, Ryou descended from the sky protected by an ice capsule. Drawing his sword, he sent a burst of ice toward Oscar, who narrowly evaded and retaliated with fireballs. Ryou dodged swiftly, closing the distance between them. Oscar drew his own sword, coating it with flames, and their blades clashed fiercely without a clear victor. Sliding across the ice with practiced ease, Ryou faced Oscar once more, both prepared to fight to the bitter end. At that moment, Abel arrived and shouted for them to stop immediately. Ryou coldly warned him not to interfere, threatening to freeze him first if he became a nuisance. Realizing Ryou was deadly serious, Abel requested a moment to resolve things peacefully. He approached Oscar, who had no idea who he was. Abel introduced himself as the representative of the Guild Master of Lune and explained that the 4 boys Oscar was attacking were adventurers from Lune, uninvolved in the assault on the princess. He acknowledged Oscar's concern, but urged him to trust his words and cease hostility. Oscar began to consider withdrawing, but Ryou refused to back down. He declared that if Abel had finished speaking, he would resume the fight and kill Oscar. Abel urged him not to be unreasonable, yet Ryou retorted that he could not forgive anyone who had harmed his friends. He even threatened to freeze the princess before returning her, which pushed Oscar over the edge. Enraged, Oscar unleashed a devastating meteor shower, terrifying everyone present. Ryou calmly countered by releasing powerful water jets that neutralized the fireballs, creating a thick cloud that soon turned into rain. He then asked Abel if he could kill Oscar now. Abel shouted that such an act would spark a war and must be avoided. Stepping between the two, Abel explained to Oscar that Prince Conrad had personally sent him to ensure Fiona's safety. He reminded Oscar that his priority should be Fiona and Conrad's protection, as well as investigating the incident, rather than attacking teenagers. Turning to Ryou, Abel urged him to lower his sword, insisting that violence would only worsen the situation. Ryou challenged him, asking if he would do the same if someone had harmed Ligia. Abel admitted he would, since Ligia would never want a war. Ryou was angered by his answer and almost attacked both Abel and Oscar, but when Abel refused to move aside, he stopped. Convinced of Abel's resolve, Ryou reluctantly stood down, telling Abel to hand the princess over to Oscar. As Abel rushed to assist Fiona, Ryou walked away, finished with his aura display. Oscar, though intrigued by Ryou, turned his attention back to helping Fiona. Ryou gazed out at the beach, recalling how he had first met Abel during a shipwreck. Looking back at his friends, he reflected on how far he had come. The next day, everyone had recovered, and Ito was delighted to learn that Ligia had healed him. Ryou remarked that all was well that ended well, but Abel arrived and called him a hypocrite. Abel was visibly drained after dealing with the diplomatic fallout, though fortunately, Conrad and Fiona had understood the situation, preventing serious consequences. Even Oscar had apologized. Though Ryou found that difficult to believe, Ryou criticized Abel for being useless the previous night, claiming he should have stopped the attack on the Lord's mansion. Abel ignored the remark and informed Niels, Ito, and Amon that the princess wished to thank them for saving her life. She had announced a reward for them, but none for Ryou since he technically had not played a direct role in her rescue. Meanwhile, Sira grew impatient waiting for Ryou's return. Though she had always been a loner, his companionship had spoiled her, leaving her restless. One day at her favorite restaurant, she spotted Ryou and her face lit up with joy. Ryou noticed her too and invited her to join him. They enjoyed a meal together before Sira led him to the library's secret archives, where she had discovered a special document on alchemy. Ryou thanked her and began taking notes. Sira pointed out that since the original document was not on proper paper, he could not use the transcribed type spell. Ryou was shocked to learn such a spell existed, and Sira laughed, saying it was the most basic of spells. Once he finished copying, Ryou asked how Sira could afford to spend so much time in the library given its high fees. Sira explained that she had once paid, but when the Lord discovered that 90% of the library's fees came from her alone, he granted her lifetime free access. Ryou was impressed, and Sira offered to take him to a transcriber so he could see the spell in action. She admitted that despite all her time among humans, she was still unfamiliar with many of their spells. Ryou began wondering about her age. Sira quickly guessed his thoughts and confidently revealed that she was 200 years old. Ryou was stunned and teased her, saying she was far too pretty for such an old hag. Embarrassed, Sira blushed. They headed to the transcriber only to encounter Abel exiting the shop as they arrived. Both Sira and Abel were surprised to see that they each knew Ryou. After Abel left, Sira told Ryou they needed to talk. She was upset that he treated Abel so casually while still acting formal with her, and demanded that he be more open. Later that day, Ryou met Abel at the inn and reminded him of his promise to treat him to dinner for a week after the dungeon incident. Abel panicked, having forgotten, but Ryou said he would exchange the favor for something else. Since his time at the dorms was nearly over, he wanted to own a house with a large yard to experiment in peace, and he asked Abel for help acquiring suitable property. Abel took him to a real estate agent, who explained that Ryou could not purchase noble property as a commoner. The only option available was a farmhouse outside the city. Ryou agreed to see it and immediately liked it. Without bothering to haggle, which he considered too middle class, he bought it at the offered price. Dreaming of a peaceful life in his new home, Ryou remained unaware that he was destined for far greater things, but that was where the story ended. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.